Hey, Michael with XForcePC. Let's talk about something that's new. That's PCI Express 4.0. So on these new AMD boards that we're using in our high-end AMD system, they're a X570 chipset. You notice on here they've got Lightning Gen 4 and PCI Gen 4.0 ready and so forth. So what they're talking about is there's a new spec for PCI Express 4.0. What does that mean exactly? Well, it means more bandwidth is available to the PCI Express bus. And what currently that really means is these SSDs that are available to us get pretty different performance numbers and benchmarks. So this is the one we usually use. It's an Intel SSD. It's rated for and gets about 1,800 megabytes per second. And then, and by the way, the PCI Express 3.0 bus, which is in all the Intel stuff, I think is limited to about 3,000, if I'm not mistaken, megabytes per second. So this isn't actually maxing out that bus as it is. So then I ordered this. This is the Corsair Mp600. It's a Gen 4 PCI, Express Gen 4 drive. It's got a big heat sink on it. It gets hot. I've felt it. It does 5,000 megabytes per second. And a ton of IOPS. IOPS is like, well, it stands for input and outputs per second, but it's essentially the responsiveness of the drive. And so I tested these, and I'm going to put the benchmark results up, which, I just wanted to make sure that the system I built was actually achieving the performance numbers that are advertised. And you'll see here that, the Intel one was getting right around 1,800 megabytes per second, and the Corsair MP600 is getting right around the 5,000 that's advertised. But then I said, hold on a minute, let me try this in a real world scenario. So I thought, well, let me come up with something that has to do with X-Plane that's hard drive intensive. So first of all, the load process, I just loaded X-Plane. And unfortunately or fortunately, the load process was almost identical within the margin of error. It took about 40 seconds on both drives, even though we saw that this drive is 2.5 times faster than this drive. They loaded X-Plane exactly the same amount of time. The other thing I did is I did an update scan. So you may know whenever you do an X-Plane update, it has to scan through all the files, and I think it's around 90,000 files. And so, you would tend to think that that's more of an IOP kind of thing. But it does appear to be single-threaded, so yet again, it may be limited by the processor. But we saw a slight win for this. So really, what's the point of this video? The point of this video is you probably don't need this. You probably don't need to spend double the money to get something that's PCI Express Gen 4, 5,000 megabytes per second, because just because this is 2.5 times faster than this, it doesn't mean your whole system is going to be 2.5 times faster. It doesn't mean that something disk intensive is going to run in 2.5 times faster time, because there's so many other factors involved. So the synthetic benchmark shows, yes, this is 2.5 times faster, but the real world tests, not to mention me just using the system, I couldn't really tell the difference between one SSD and the other. They're both incredibly fast, and you just really can't tell the difference. So unless you have a special use case where you really need the type of IOPS and throughput that this drive is capable of, you're doing something truly disk intensive, reading and writing massive amounts of data to the hard drive, then the more mainstream SSD, which we use, is the better choice, and that's why we're going to continue to use it as our workhorse, because it just proves spending all that extra money on a super high performance SSD just doesn't make sense. Not to say this isn't a good SSD, because it is. I'm not saying it's not a high-performance SSD. This one is just a little over the top and unnecessary.